reality transurfing, there's quite a lot of interesting details connected to intention setting that goes beyond the idea of visualizing that result that you want to reach or magnetizing the frame from the alternative space. So I wanted to say a bit more about intention and those specifics because I think it's doing more justice to that framework, and maybe also, it's more helpful to have those details with you if you go forward with considering how to use this framework. And one fascinating detail in reality transurfing was the concept of outer and inner intention. And here it is creating quite a contrast to the way intention is generally used or seen as something that you have it with you. You see the result you want, you connect to your desires and what you want to manifest, and that's seen as just one aspect of this pair. In reality transurfing, that's called inner intention, like your intention that you're focused on. And the outer intention has it can be quite a tricky concept to connect to because it's so, I haven't heard it anywhere else in the same way, and it's basically about, the way I understood it, it's about getting out of the way so that the universe can meet you halfway, so that things can show up in your life, that there's space for things to show up in a way that there's the resonance with your inner and the outer intention. So what does that mean, getting out of the way? Isn't it enough to just visualize and have my intention and go after it, and then things will manifest? And yeah, that would be lovely, that our conscious mind could just do all of that and we could just decide consciously. But then there is something that is quite generally described in many areas of psychology, many frameworks, this division of conscious, subconscious, unconscious, or just like different facets or different functions, different areas of the mind, or if you go into connecting them to different areas in the brain, like the amygdala compared to the cortical areas. But I won't go into those. For that, there are many better resources. But here, if we stay with the reality transurfing concept of inner and outer intention, then there's also the whole thing of how do things get manifested? How do my intentions get rendered or created into the reality I see? And there, the subconscious or even unconscious plays a crucial role, because in reality transurfing it's described as there needs to be coherence between mind and heart. But mind being that rational, strategic, the planning side of your mind, I would say the kind of conscious mind, and the heart being just that intuitive or the kind of flowing, playful, hopeful sense of what the heart deeply wishes for and wants, and it doesn't see any limitations. It's connected to the emotions, it's feeling in the present moment. It doesn't plan, it doesn't conceptualize what's past, what's future. It's just in this moment, kind of vibing with whatever comes up. And that's why I view it as kind of like that unconscious mind, the inner mind, or that maybe more primal part of the mind in some ways. But also, maybe the concept shouldn't be confused, because the way it's described in Reality Transurfing with the mind and the heart feels like that's a much more broad concept for maybe that true self, your kind of soul's deeper, I don't know, being, is kind of how I've connected to it. So it's not exactly the same as the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. I just kind of compare them together, because what I then learned from rapid resolution therapy, the subconscious or even unconscious levels, the inner mind has that way of being where it is connecting to whatever events, what happens in that very, in the present moment, thinking everything that comes up in the thoughts is something that's happening now. It's like a threat now, and it's going to activate some emotions or some behaviors to protect you, and so on. So I felt there is some connection between these two, and the whole idea of coherence between the mind and the heart also feels to me a bit similar as when we, with our conscious mind, seek to also have some awareness about what's going on in the subconscious, and how that subconscious, and this is more from a Jungian perspective, that Jung has stated that when the subconscious is unconscious, then it will basically rule your life, and that's what we call fate. But when you bring the understanding, when you bring the information from the subconscious more into the conscious realm, you have awareness, you have an overview, and you can work with that. And that's it's a different perspective than in rapid resolution therapy, where necessarily the participant doesn't need to be aware or do a whole lot of introspection or go there. That's the job of the RRT specialist, to help them, to guide them to go into those events from before, or to get those subconscious functioning more into the light, and kind of then work with that and shift it in the moment through multi-level communication, through speaking directly to that unconscious part. And that necessarily the conscious mind will be aware of it when we are working with it and going into those stories, and like, but it's a bit of a different approach still, I feel, where other approaches focused more on introspection and developing awareness. That's the end goal, is just having that awareness. While in RRT, the end goal is actually just like shifting how that data is processed by the mind, so that it functions in a more useful way. And reality transurfing, in a similar manner, is a very pragmatic framework. They're very different, but I can't help but see the connections. They both kind of have that approach of like kind of a cool-headed, pragmatic approach. Like, okay, we have to, like, what do we need to know so that we can shift things so that they would function more smoothly, and in a way that the person can actually kind of take more control of their own fate and shift those dysfunctional mental loops. So in reality transurfing, that concept then with mind and heart working together, and when mind and heart are working together, those things will just be manifested, or that intention will be realized, because there's no friction, there's nothing in the way, your whole being is on board. And that's when the heart wishes for something, but the mind is unsure or is fearful, or thinks that, oh, that would not be possible, that couldn't happen, then there is that kind of friction and things can't float smoothly or flow on in the way that you would wish. And in that case, I do believe there is a value in some type of some process of developing that awareness, or even shifting those dysfunctional loops that are in the way, or really working with the mind in that way. And that was my own experience with reality transurfing. With just, I started to recognize certain stories that would come up, and just like some things could not kind of flow smoothly. There was like a wall that came up in the way, and other areas of my life is like, yeah, obvious, it just works and develops of its own accord in a way. And then the question is, how do we do this? Now I'm rambling all over the place with these different perspectives, and I don't maybe even myself completely know how to connect all those unconscious, subconscious, mind, heart. What is it? What is it all? Like, how do we get the clarity about all these terms and how to actually use them? What are the action steps? And this is a big challenge for me. I really enjoy rambling and seeing these different ideas, these frameworks, and kind of comparing. And in the end, I still want to, my intention is that I could provide something that is also of a useful nature, a practical value immediately. So now I want to really try and gather those strands into something, get my own mind and heart into that place of coherence where I can share some steps. And of course there are a lot of different pathways that could lead to a similar place. Whatever calls to you, whatever you kind of feel light up or excited about, what pulls your energy towards it, that's what's probably gonna be helpful for you and right for you. And in my case, there was something with reality transurfing that was just so out there and just created that space of, oh, I have a right to just appreciate my life for that beautiful, the uniqueness, just, and trying to connect back to what way could my energy flow out into the world in a way that brings me pleasure, while also having a positive impact on the world or others. And that's also something in reality transurfing that is in there. It's, at first glance it can appear like a framework for a kind of very individual, self-centered, like, what do I want, I'm gonna impose my will. But that's the thing with outer inner intention. With inner intention, you can see it as imposing your will, or what do I want. But when you add a piece of outer intention to it, the outer intention is that kind of perspective that's beyond you. It's more about how that energy, your energy, can flow out into a world in a way where it's bringing something that's beyond you, something of value to others. And actually things will go more smoothly if it's a win-win situation. That creates less friction. If you don't have to fight others for getting your way, that's gonna actually be a easier path. And it's the funny thing with in reality transurfing that all of this is presented in a kind of matter of fact tone, that it's kind of neutral. It's not so much about if you're a good person or bad person. It's just described as a mechanic of reality. And then to even have a possibility of that outer intention of like the universe meeting you halfway, then it is helpful to understand what's going on in your own, like in the background of your mind, in the subconscious, or in those things that just somehow show up in your reality. Like you always meet a certain type of a coworker or boss that seems to really annoy you and get on your nerves, and you don't know why does this always happen to me. If there's something that can be helpful, is if you notice something happening where you're getting that thought, why does this always happen to me? That could be pointing at a pattern that just wants to express outward in your life, because you are holding some kind of a belief that that's how life is. That's how the world is. That's why it's showing itself in that way, like, hey, this is who I am, this is who I am. If you remember what I had that character of the reality earlier, like the clown jumping around, then it's going to take that form so that you get to face that belief in the external. So in that case, first step is to observe, like, this showed up again. I'm gonna can write it up and take note. Like treating your own life or reality as a fascinating kind of research subject. That's the main experience you have to pull from, and it can be quite fascinating to see it that way, like a game of where did that come from? Oh, I had that thought. I have that belief, and that gets shown in my reality. And sometimes it can be tricky to do it on your own. Like how that's why we have these different processes or methods or kind of guidance available from other people, like RRT or shadow work, or yeah, even like in Jungian analysis, like you would go and uncover what's going on there. Of course, my focus is more on RRT because it's so clearly focused on the shifting, and it can happen faster than in just in a longer processing. But maybe sometimes people need a longer processing time. For me, I have gone through processes of in more like talk therapy, and while I've been a bit critical about it too, if I look back, I'm happy I feel content over having experienced all of those different approaches. And for me, I think it was also a part of my process. It was helpful. I wanted to go deeper into have a bit of that uh, introspection, or see what would this therapist kind of bring up and how does it function. And it did enable me to acknowledge certain emotions and patterns or things in childhood, but then in the end I felt there was like a wall, that there wasn't anywhere else to go with that type of a method for me. And then RRT entered the scene. Well, before that I had shadow work session that was a step towards in addition to just talking about my childhood or the past or these emotions that can come up, that you notice something that's triggering, that showed me a way of like, oh, I can express it and it does release something. And there is some kind of shift that's possible more than just talking about those things in the expressing. So it was like, that was for me the next step in that process. And then I also felt a bit like, while I am focused on maybe going and screaming out my anger or all of these things, that also met a little bit of a wall for me, where I thought maybe there's some other way that I could try. Some way we could go like deeper underneath that whole pattern of needing to express it and shift that lies there at the root. And then RRT appeared in my life, and I've now attended 3 sessions where we have done exactly that and traveled back into certain memories and used storytelling and getting the body, taking the body with us on the ride of being in a certain state, and then being able to get the message that things have been shifted. You're not in your 14-year-old self anymore. And now, after having experienced that, I notice, okay, that was for me the next step, where I saw I got a chance to talk about and process things. Then I learned to express it, I got it out, I started to release some of that energy. And the next step was, okay, enough of that just screaming or expressing. Could I get even deeper in underneath and not need to go and scream all the time? Not all the time, but maybe sometimes still is good to get just a quick release of energy in a healthier way than against other people. So screaming into a pillow, great. But then it was possible to kind of take that edge off. Still, it's good to experience your emotions. I think that's a part of human life, in my, at least my life. But not having the mind go into that kind of threatened state where it's kind of an irrational type of anger, where a little child is not actually a threat, and that's not the person I want to attack or scream at. And in that case, it was a relief, like, oh yeah, it's possible to create that space between, because my mind is now on board and realizing, like, yeah, oh yeah, this is not a threat actually. I don't need to be angry here. And that kind of a process then, for me so far, has been landing into a place where I can feel that sense of just a centered, a sense of being centered in a different way than before, where those emotions would have taken me with them on a ride, and they still do to some extent, but not to the depths that they did before. And that's something that I think is getting the mind and the heart on the same page. First, you have to know what your heart holds, and it's helpful to also be aware of what typical loops or patterns the mind works in. And then when both of those are a bit more available to you, then there are things that can be done, like to get them on the same page. And maybe sometimes it's helpful to have a guide, someone with you on the journey. And in these methods, these processes that I have experienced, I would add to that also the process that's presented in the gene keys. It's like a bit of an opposite approach to RRT, in a way that the gene keys is very much about learning to observe these shadow behaviors showing up in your everyday life, and embracing them, or at the first even just acknowledging them and then allowing them to exist, because it can be hard to embrace a pattern you don't like in yourself. And the first step is just allowing it to present itself. And as it does present itself, you learn something from that. And it's also connected to the awareness of how things have developed in the childhood. But there isn't any process of immediately going and shifting things. It's more of a slower unfolding, or maybe it can happen quicker. But that has also been a valuable process for me, with kind of that's been going on while I've been also experimenting with these other approaches. That has been kind of in the background of it, and that did help to give me the approaches of that took the edge off, that reduced the importance of those shadows of the anger or whatever way it came, like in reactions. Reducing importance, another useful concept from reality transurfing, where if you're attached to something, really like, oh, have to have this, or it has to be this way, I have to be able to show up as my best self. There's a lot of importance there, that you just try to force things to be a certain way. And again, if we compare it to the inner and outer intention, there's no space for anything to come and meet you halfway when you're trying to force things to be from just your inner, just from your own intention. And there, for reducing importance, I think Gene Keys was a process that really helped, because it's so much about the gentleness, being gentle with yourself, to let things show themselves, and things will shift over time as if you have the process of a contemplative mind that is aware, have some pauses in the day where you just have that space to breathe, which can be tricky if you're in a kind of activated state. For me, I noticed I had a few days where I was like in a panic, and it doesn't help to make a pause. It doesn't help to try to pause and contemplate, because my mind is not able to contemplate in that state. So all of these approaches, all of these tools, all these frameworks, everything has its own place, its own right, the correct time and place is what I landed in. And now my intention with having that experience, having these tools in my tool belt, is that I have seen examples of where they're helpful and in what ways, and I intend to be someone who can help to bring up the right tool for the right moment, and who has those tools to draw from, or those lenses or perspectives. And for someone who is in this kind of confused place, or activated or dysregulated, then maybe it's helpful to have guidance of someone who's outside of that cloud of confusion, and who can offer one pathway, or even few different ways that confusion could be kind of cleared. And in that way, I'm seeing, looking back on this season 2 of Mysterious Studies, it was my own process of trying to express, but also trying to understand what have I actually learned from these frameworks. How can I talk about them? How can I use them in a way that could be useful for others, not just me, because I'm such a curious experimenter that no matter how it would end up or the result, I always would find some value in it. But I wanted to also arrive at a place where I can see directly what do they do in what way, so I could see where it could have value in what kind of a situation, for what kind of a person. And I feel like I have arrived in that place, or started to. land more in that place. And a central thing that stands out in all of this is in reality creation. If it's a new idea for you to even imagine that my mind influences how my reality beyond me appears or shows itself. If that's a new idea, it's good to start with gathering evidence of things showing up and playing with it in a kind of light-hearted manner. You could, for example, you could say a word or something that you're like, hey, I would be curious to see how a red balloon would show up. Like, just imagining a red balloon, or if you think of from reality transurfing, kind of magnetizing the frame of experiencing that. And then there will be some way that that's gonna show up. Maybe it's not even in a picture, maybe it would be in a movie, maybe it would be someone speaking those words. But those kinds of approaches are also in reality transurfing. They are encouraged because that's a way that you get your mind and your heart on board. Reality transurfing, it presents the heart as the heart knows. The heart already knows that the world is magical and that you are magical, and it's that's not magic that's out there. It's actually a part of the mechanism, the mechanic of the universe, because it's energy, and if it's all energy, it makes sense. It moves, you can dance with it, you can influence it. But the mind has learned so many different statements about what works and what doesn't, what's real and what isn't. And that's where that mind, those things have, maybe they are deep in the mind and there's contradicting beliefs and all these things. So that can be quite hard then to get that heart and that mind on board and on the same page. But the mind responds well to evidence. When you see something happening, when you're able to see the results of influencing things or having imagined something and then it shows up, then the mind can't help but take note and be like, okay, maybe there is something to it. And there it's helpful to have these approaches that speak to the rational, strategic, conscious mind. And that's where I also want to bring in human design into this conversation, because that's a system or a framework or perspective that speaks to the rational mind and trying to describe how your energy functions in a way that has kind of this, in a way it can be seen as pretty out there, but also it's connecting back to neutrinos, to physics, to those realms that we are seen as, that are seen as more grounded, but they're also kind of strange. Yeah, the whole paradox of if reality is just intrinsically, inherently strange. What is strange? That means that strange is actually normal. So strange things to happen is just a normal part of the functioning of that strange universe. I don't know if I managed to wrap anything up or give any practical steps in this additional episode. but I'm sure I gave something. And if you want to have a direct conversation with me, I'm now actually offering like a free call to just want to chat with people directly who resonate, or maybe who are confused, or if you want to work with me in some capacity, just have my perspective on your life, have an interaction, then I'd love to meet and see what could come from that. And it's a new thing for me to offer this kind of thing and to really take that step to be available to the extent that I feel comfortable. But I want to take an additional step in that direction and interact in addition to just rambling, and which I also enjoy. So a bit of both is good, some ramblings and then some interactions to see what influence did my own intentions and actions have on the world around me. So I'm looking forward to connecting with whoever feels called, and wishing you enjoyable reality creation, experimenting and playing. So let that phone call be our signal to end this episode. Bye.